Hi, I'm Levi, host and producer of Not About You. I want to say thanks for listening. This episode is a special episode. It is about whiteness, and it's sort of white passing or white identifying folks talking about what it means to be white, sort of addressing this question of what do we do if we are starting to engage and hadn't been that engaged. What do we do now? I had phone interviews with folks, so you'll note that difference in audio quality. And these are all conversations with people that I am friends with, but who do connect to this kind of work in various ways. You will first hear from Emily, and then you'll hear from Brendan, and then you'll hear from Laney. So thank you for listening, and I'm going to get right into Not About You.
My name is Emily Krumberger. I'm born and raised in Minneapolis, and I'm a youth worker and a off-again, on-again organizer in the community.
Well, Emily, I really appreciate you giving me some of your time. I will say you're someone who I've been lucky enough to have some really open conversations about any number of sort of justice-related issues, but certainly anti-racist work and organizing work in general. So that's sort of one of the reasons I wanted to try and connect with you. The thing I'm trying to get some response to or ideas about is there's a lot of folks asking in the wake of some pretty overt anti-Black and then broadly sort of racist action and some people actually getting hurt and someone actually dying, standing up for racial justice and racial equity. There's folks asking, well, what do I do? Who maybe haven't felt like they've been engaged. And I'm trying to sort of help cobble together some ways of thinking about what to do or some ideas about who to actually connect with. You know, what do you do with that question of what do I do?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question to start from, and that means that you're thinking and that you know that you're part of this and you're affected, or at least you're concerned, and maybe it's not the first time you're saying that, but you feel a wave of it again, and maybe it's the first time you're opening your eyes to it. I think there's not any one starting place, and there's no one way to do it right or perfectly, but starting to get involved and in a way that really makes sense and feels attached to your life and what you're about, instead of just kind of volunteering kind of in this vague way to help others. Well, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, and that's part of a lot of cultures or religions practices, trying to think about how it can be even more specific to your life and what you're doing. And at the end of the day, though this might not happen right away, it's about getting pretty disciplined about what you want to do and how you want to do it, and that may, for some people, take years to figure out. I've certainly taken years to figure out how I want to go about this, and at this point, you know, being a youth worker for about 9 years, figured out I want to work with youth around understanding their world, help amplify their voices, and work with youth who may not have had as much understanding in, you know, white supremacy or how the world's working, as well as working with youth who have a pretty good understanding of that based on their identity, and then just, you know, making sure they have the resources to do what they need around addressing that in their school or the community. So thinking about kind of what role you already play in your life and what skills you're good at and what you're willing to do that isn't going to be something that's kind of outside that spectrum that's going to make you tired and feel like you're doing it just to be a good person, but rather something that's connected to you. So if you're someone that maybe has a lot of wealth, think about how you want to spend that in really intentional ways, and there's a lot of good examples of how to do that, whether it be to sponsor folks who don't have access to higher education, leadership programming, supporting small businesses owned by people in the community you're part of who are of color, or immigrant or maybe didn't have the same kind of avenues to wealth as you had, thinking about what reparations means, and if you don't know that, trying to research that, and thinking about if you have land, how to find a way to get that back into the hands of people who originally had that land, or, you know, providing a deed, writing the name of someone you maybe are in a relationship with in in your will or in the deed. So thinking about that, or if you're a teacher, how are you going to implement education that is really showing and giving voice to the range of people who are part of America and suffered and benefited from it in a very honest way, or challenging youth or people, if it's adults that you're teaching, to think about that. If you're, I mean, it totally depends who you are and what you do and what you want to do, and protesting outside isn't the only way to do things, though that's often the most visible and the one that's maybe most talked about or even most criticized, but it's not the only way to get involved. So I think thinking about that first, I think, you know, talking about as white people, you know, what kind of work do I need to think about in my racist actions? I think that's a lifelong thing, but it's not, I guess, wouldn't be the thing that I suggest first. I think oftentimes it becomes a thing, usually for middle-class white people, to kind of think about all the bad things they've done, or think about the way that, you know, white supremacy occurs, and it almost becomes a self-fulfilling thing where then it's a privilege to even have the time to think about all that instead of actually acting or being imperfect and then being checked by people who maybe, you know, you started to do some of this work and people had to redirect you, and that feels hard, but that's part of the work, is to hear that, and we can't always get that from an article. The other part is well, you know, doing that action, whether at work. So maybe it's thinking about, if you're not a teacher but you work in nonprofits, thinking about hiring practices or who's making decisions at your work and how can you stick your neck out a little bit more for that. Also doing it in relationships. So not every white person has relationships with people who are different from them in terms of class or race. But if you do, really thinking about, you know, how are you showing up in that relationship? How can you give more or support? And a lot of this work can be done in relationship between white people, challenging ourselves using the relationships we already have, as well as not to go out and make more relationships with people of color, but genuinely do it maybe through work or through community, again, but kind of base it on how does this connect to your life, and think about, really importantly, what stake do you have in it for wanting change. So if you really do want change, not just, oh, you think it's awful that people are dying, you want to do something about it, but what would you gain or lose from really things changing? And what change are you going to want to be a part of making? Because some people might, and this is going to be honest, is maybe they really don't want things to change. It might actually be uncomfortable, and that's maybe not okay, but it is what it is. That's honest. So think about one thing that maybe you could work towards changing in your life or at work that would work towards the change you say you want, and really think critically about how does it affect you and how might you benefit in some way your kids from things actually changing.
You use the word that discipline, learning to be disciplined, and I feel like that connects to that idea of truly thinking about what you personally will gain or lose if you engage in working towards change. Because I think there's two things. One, how can I try to make change without me really gaining or losing anything seems to happen. And then also for someone else to sort of get access to more resources I have to lose. And I think that's often framed as this negative or sort of deficit approach.
So thinking about the fact that if we're just thinking about resources like money and land, like there is more than enough to go around. It's just so concentrated in some people's hands versus others. And we're kind of used to this way of living, which, by the way, is not all that new in terms of houses or cars or apartments or suburbs we've lived in probably just since, our parents or our parents' parents' generation. So change isn't, it might feel extreme, but in the grand scheme of things, not, not that long ago that it was different. But yeah, so kind of, one thing is reframing that kind of transactional give or lose way of thinking, but then also being real that there are some things that might change or lose, but again, what are we gaining? Are we gaining a different and more vibrant, a more honest community? Are we going to be willing to work in different ways that aren't just about money or time or, I have this nice lawn and cabin versus me without it? What's really scary and what's really hard about that, and why is that, and what would it look like without that, and are we really losing something? And is it that attachment to place, and then how could we, share that in a collective manner? How could we go to another park and another place and still have that time with your family?
I wonder if you can, because one thing you said that I think is really important is try to figure out what your skills are and what resources you have access to engage, rather than trying to do what you see other people doing. Because I think you're right that that idea of I'm nervous about going to a protest or direct action, but that seems like the thing people do, and I think that's a misconception. Also, there's a misconception about what it means to be at a protest, which is like, in my experience, full of love, but that's a whole separate conversation. But the idea of what is it you're able to do and how can that contribute to this larger goal of progress? I just wonder if you can say anything about how can someone do that? Like, is there approaches to that, like mapping out what you have access to and what you're capable of?
Yeah, I don't think there's one way to do it. There's a lot of community resources and organizations out there, and I think probably the first thing is just really talking about it and learning more about it, whether it's that writing down or mapping out what your skills are and what you're willing to do, maybe learning about other examples first. I think we think about, well, change is so hard. What is it really going to take? These people protesting, that's not really doing anything. But really looking at examples of what, civil rights examples or during that time period as well as before that or in the 90s of ways of doing community and ways of kind of reorganizing your finances or thinking about what skills you have to offer. And sometimes if you don't know, it's simple as like doing childcare, cooking for something. And then not to make it such a soft thing, like just do what makes sense for you, but also think about, what would it mean for you to share your space if you have extra rooms in your house for people who are being deported or who are being arrested again, they can't pay bail. Like, what would it mean to really, welcome them into your house as was done during slavery times? And what's what are you willing to risk? Are you willing to give up money to support someone who's never been to college, who's lower income or of color, to have resources that were easy for you? Or are you willing to, if you do have land, put it back into a community trust or make a deal with a tribe to give back that land to a tribe that makes sense? Or think about examples of that and kind of, there's not one really good place to research all those things because I think it's pretty intentional that a lot of that knowledge has been kept hidden and we don't hear about alternative ways to do these things. And that's kind of the first and foremost thing of realizing that and thinking about, okay, what kind of skills do I have to offer, talking about it with someone and being real about what's really uncomfortable, and that's okay. You shouldn't necessarily feel guilty. Just be honest about that maybe it's hard for you. The fact that you're talking about it and you're willing to be open to it at the beginning is already a step right there. And then, think about how far would you go to be uncomfortable? Would you get arrested? Would you do things in a way that are different, spend money, share your resources, teach your kids in a certain way, interact with people in a way that's not so transactional, or not, maybe at work, not in such like a kind of white supremacist, white culture way, not around kind of title and educational background and about being, this has to be quick and efficient and there's only one way to do it, but rethinking how you do those things, and definitely just starting at one of those, not trying to do it all at once.
Yeah.
In terms of places to start, I've often just learned a lot from listening to people who grew up differently or had to, who are people of color close to me who had to grow up just with thinking about a lot of different things than I had to think about in terms of how easy it was for me to go to school or walk down the street or drive and not get stopped. So having those conversations, I think there's a lot of knowledge in that. There's certainly a lot of knowledge in books and articles as well. But listening to people, looking up things like Cooperation Jackson in Mississippi, and that's kind of like alternative community model there, folk schools in the South, freedom schools, Highlander in Tennessee, any number of people, Martin Luther King and beyond in the civil rights movement, looking at how youth work was done by the Black Panthers, or thinking about how, people like John Trudell looked at kind of identity and colonialism, and those are places to start, as well as, just the relationships you have with you and already in your life. There's no one good place to start, but I think it's starting to just have conversations about that and question things and seeking out knowledge. Once you start doing that, I think there's a lot out there that you can Google, and you can go to the library, and there's not one, everyday feminist article with a list of 10 things to do that I know about or going to suggest, because often the knowledge is just by listening to other people.
That's great. You just gave a whole list of resources I was going to ask you. You didn't suggest anything, but I feel like you just gave people a trail to go down. So I think that's really excellent. Well, Emily, I really appreciate you just taking a little time and sort of going through some of this with me. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for doing what you're doing.
My name is Brendan Kelly. I'm a dad and sometimes organizer, and I work in media and spend a lot of time thinking about voices and platforms and narratives and systems of power. And I guess thinking about white supremacy, specifically in systematic kinds of ways, the ways that it is foundational to a lot of the systems that I participate in my life, is something that I've struggled with and worked on and tried to be aware of and thoughtful about ways that I benefit from and contribute to, whether intentionally or not. And then finally, just sort of evaluating what I can do with my life and with my time and with my resources and my energy to fight that system of white supremacy and dismantle it to create the world that I want to live in and that I want my kids to grow up in.
Well, so I will say, first of all, thanks for giving me some of your time. You, I know, are, as you said, you're a working dad, so that is no joke where time is concerned. And you are one of few people who has been really important to me in sort of shifting from passive to active engagement with ideas around systemic white supremacy and any other number of issues. So that's one of the reasons I thought of you and wanting to talk to you, because you helped create a safe space for me to ask really dumb questions and have my own personal growth as well as build my own network of organizers. So with knowing that, I think what I wanted to sort of ask you to speak to is there are a lot of people who are wondering what to do, how to react in the face of sort of maybe becoming more aware of not just individual acts of racism or even anti-Semitism, but also maybe seeing that it's a bigger, deeper thing, that idea of systemic oppression and systemic racism. And so I feel like I'm hearing a lot of people wonder what to do, either to grow that awareness or to somehow do something to change, make the world better in some way. So I wonder if you can speak to that idea.
Sure. So, yeah, I don't tangible, like, show up at this place at this time to fix racism type advice. Really wish I did. And I think that there are already really great resources for that kind of, like, if that's what you're looking for, like, where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do specifically? Obviously, there's no right answer and there's no one answer. But there are places and organizations like Standing Up for Racial Justice or SURGE that can be a really good resource for that. I guess my advice has more to do with sort of getting your mind and your heart right and showing up to those spaces when you find them with the right attitude and the right mindset to be helpful and to be cognizant of who this is about and who this is for and who's organizing this and maybe what role you have to play in it. I think you already tapped into a really big thing just in describing our relationship. And by the way, I think the feeling is really mutual. But, when you talked about creating a safe space to talk with other folks who have similar privileges because of their skin, I think that's incredibly helpful, finding people who you feel safe being imperfect around and asking, like you said, embarrassing questions. Because something that I've heard in a lot of the work within the movement for racial justice, something that I've heard from a lot of organizers of color and indigenous folks is don't show up here looking for lessons from us. Like, we're already engaged in the real work and we've been doing this. Don't show up and treat me like a free college course in, racial justice work. Do the work on your own. So I'd say read a lot of books. There's fantastic materials available, like The New Jim Crow and The People's History of the United States, and lots and lots of stuff. But more than that, get involved in conversations where you're allowed to make yourself vulnerable and mess up and keep it moving. And then above all, show up. That's kind of the hardest part. I feel like at the beginning, like if you're really new to this, I feel like it can be really scary, just because you're not really sure what to expect and you're certain that you'll do the wrong thing. But we have to make ourselves vulnerable and recognize there are folks who don't get to opt in and out of this fight, for whom this is just their life. So, show up above all. And when you do show up, I think something to be aware of is, so, like there's a thing that happens in teenagers where their brain develops in a way that suddenly unlocks empathy and suddenly unlocks like cognizance of just how unjust the world is. And because it's brand new to them, because their brain is brand new to being able to flex in this way, it's why a lot of teenagers get that sort of self-righteous tone and act like they're the first person who ever noticed that the world's kind of fucked up,
Yeah.
And I think that there's a tendency to do the same thing as somebody who's new to movement work. And so, make sure that you show up in spaces with a lot of humility, show up ready to do a lot of listening. Don't show up telling people about the right way to protest or what tone they should be taking or telling them about the times that you spent protesting for X, Y, or Z. Remember that you're there to support work that other people are organizing and that this work has been going on for a very long time without you, I think that it's helpful to spend time privately and with your cohort of European American anti-racist fighters to meditate on the privilege that you enjoy And be careful, I would say, I guess, about how you engage in that work. I think it can easily become kind of masturbatory. And also sometimes it plays out as like performative white guilt, you know? And also there's sort of a pitfall that I fell into for a long time of kind of tricking yourself into thinking that recognizing your privilege is the work, you know? When instead, like, it's a tool, you know? You should be studying the way that your privilege works so that it can inform the way that you make decisions and actions when life comes, right? So, you know, an example I was just reading about this afternoon is there's an actor, a European-American actor, who was given a role in the new Hellboy movie. I guess they're doing a reboot of Hellboy. And he was given this role, and, you know, it's a juicy role. It comes with the visibility of being in a superhero movie. I'm guessing it comes with a nice paycheck. But when it was pointed out to him that the character he was playing in the comic books was a person of Asian descent, he recognized the privilege that he enjoys as a white actor. He recognized that he's part of a system that has historically whitewashed roles away from people of color and indigenous folks. And he sacrificed that opportunity and that paycheck in order to help be part of the solution and in order to help correct the problem, right? And like, that's a big, grand example, but in your life, there's a million small ways that white supremacy plays out on systemic levels, you know, little microaggressions to bigger things. And so, you know, ask yourself questions like, you know, depending on what your life is and what you do and where you are, you know, when I'm at, work meetings, do people take my voice and my perspective more seriously because of the color of my skin? Do I sometimes accidentally get credit for the ideas and the work of my colleagues of color because it's assumed, you know, that I'm more capable? And if so, if you're seeing that play out, what can you do? Can you take care to make room for voices of color at those meetings? Can you be intentional about giving credit to your colleagues when it's appropriate? And I think that this is just important, maybe even more important, at protests and in organizing spaces. These same things are at work and they play out there too. You know, when you're at a protest, recognize that you may be one of the least vulnerable people there, right? In terms of immigration status. You know, after we hang up, I'm going to go wake my kids up and go to a march about this DACA mess.
Yeah.
And chances are there will be people there who risk deportation if they get caught up in the legal system. You know, I may be the least vulnerable in terms of how the legal system treats me if arrests are made.
Right.
If police descend on the crowd, my safety, my physical safety at the hands of police may be it may be more secure than other people's. And so I'm not going to do wild shit that makes me feel like a revolutionary that then puts people of color in that space in danger, right? But it also works the other way. You know, if a militarized police force is moving in on a protest or an action that's organized by people of color, am I willing to stand on the front line if asked to, along with other white identifying people, as a barrier to help keep the police from harming people of color, right? Because we enjoy that privilege.
I think the saying "if asked to" is really important in that
right.
example you just shared.
Yeah, because like I said at the top, you know, like, don't show up and just assume, like, remember that you're in service, that you're showing up to be of service to the people who are organizing this. You didn't come here to be Superman, because you're not Superman.
Takeaway. Who was an immigrant, by the way, Superman?
Who was an immigrant, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, I guess at the same time that you're, like, mapping out your privilege, I think it's also really helpful. And I think this is a great step, a great first step for people who are sort of new to paying closer attention to these things and to wanting to take an active role in fighting against them. I think a really great first step is to do asset mapping. You know, you are not going to be able to solve racism by yourself, but you can examine your life and your skill set and your assets to see where it is that you have the capacity to make impact. You know, if you have wealth, how can you invest it in movements and businesses and communities of color? If you have a platform, how can you use it to elevate the voices of people of color and indigenous folks? Yeah, and if you have a skill set, a unique skill set, how can you make it available to the movement, right? And ask yourself what you're willing to sacrifice. You know, I think it's really easy to put a lawn sign, you know, like a Black Lives Matter lawn sign in your front yard and post a weekly Facebook post that expresses how concerned you are about all this and sign some online petitions and feel like you're being really helpful. But again, there's folks who don't have the option to opt in and out of this fight. So, you know, if you're really about this, you need to ask yourself, what is it that I'm willing to sacrifice?
Yeah, and I think that example you gave of that actor, Ed Skrein, I don't know how to pronounce his British name, is powerful because he actually did give something up, and he doesn't know for sure that some Japanese American actor is going to get that gig. He just knows he shouldn't take that job. So he was giving something up, not knowing if that was going to lead to any other gain for somebody, just that it was wrong for him to take that thing.
Yeah, you know, and I think you're right. That's a good point, that he did so not knowing what the result of it would be. And I think that's important in all of this work, is we have to divorce ourselves to a certain extent from the result. You know what I mean? Like we have to show up, do our best, and then, you know, my mom would say, what does she say? She says, do your best and leave the rest. You know what I mean? But you know, by sacrificing that role, by being somebody with some clout and with some media attention, that man put more pressure on the studio to do right by that role than 100,000 signatures online could have ever done. You know, because again, part of his privilege, part of his assets is media attention. If he steps away from that role and he says, it's because there's a long history of this happening and it's not right and I'm not going to participate in it, then it puts the studio in a position where they look like assholes if they're like, cool. So anyway, what's Jeremy Irons doing? You know? So, and again, like, they don't all have to be these grand gestures. And, you know, something else that I saw, speaking of big grand gestures on the parts of famous people, something else that I saw that really stood out to me, I don't know football well enough to name names or even teams, but I saw that there was a European-American football player who supported the kneeling during the national anthem. And when he started getting a lot of attention for it, because I believe he was the first white identifying person to do that, I saw that his wife, I'm guessing with his blessing, put out a statement saying, like, don't make him a white savior. Like, this is not about him. There's somebody who literally lost his job over this. Like, my guy is safe here. He's not the hero. He's just stepping up to support the people who are doing the real work and who are really putting their bodies and their careers and, you know, their safety and their public trust on the line. And I think that's a really important part of it, too.
Well, obviously, I could ask you a million questions and you have lots of good thoughts. Can I mention that you are running a community radio station, KRSM, in South Minneapolis?
Well, now you have.
Sorry, I have no choice.
No,
it's just a good representation of a broad diversity of voices.
And if you have time, I guess that makes me think of, like, maybe one last thing, which is just that, how do I put this? I think we need to be realistic with ourselves, you know? this is not a sprint. It's a marathon that maybe never ends. You know, a marathon on a treadmill. And I think some people have like an event or a relationship or a book or something that just sparks something in them, and suddenly, again, because they're new to it, they just like the flame burns real hot, you know. And you can kind of like throw yourself into this and do everything possible and scream in your relative's face about racism and like show up at every event and join every committee and do everything. And then like a year later, like racism isn't fixed, and you can feel really burnt out and discouraged and like it's all hopeless and it's not helping anybody. And that's of no use to the movement. You know, like, in fact, I just got back from a trip with my family, and the events in Charleston, and then the president's remarks following them, and the conversations around violent white supremacy that followed, all happened while I was on the road. And it gave me a chance to sort of just reflect all over again about like where I fit into all this. And one of the things that I realized is that I'm actually, if I'm allowed to say this, like I feel like I'm trying to do too much. And, you know, I was reading a book called Emergent Strategy that said exactly what I needed to hear at the right time, which was, you know, rather than spreading yourself a mile wide but only getting an inch deep, focus on being an inch wide and a mile deep. You know what I mean? Focus on the places where you really legitimately have levers that you can pull that might make change, even if it's just in relationships. You know, start small and move out from there. Start, you know, if you want to change the world, take a look at yourself and make a change. No, you know, that really is the words I was about to say before I realized I was quoting Michael Jackson. No, you know, like really, if you're trying to change the world, like look at the choices that you're making in the life that you're living first, and then start moving out in concentric circles. What are you teaching your children? Not just with your words, but with your example. Are you putting them in spaces where they get to see you being vulnerable and get to see you making sacrifices? And are you processing it with them? What about your relationship with your spouse, your parents, your extended family? And then from there, your workplace and your neighborhood and your place of worship. And like, that's where the real work happens. Showing up at the protests and, you know, all these other things, that's important stuff too. But if you're not working on the places in your life where these things play out on a day-to-day basis, then you're not really doing the work, I think.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Brendan. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much for talking with me, Levi.
Hi, I'm Laney McKee, and I'm a white woman. I'm about to be 40. I'm from the Midwest originally, although now I live in New Orleans, and I live with my husband, and the two of us have adopted a son who's Latino, and we're both white parents, and we have a Latino son, so that means it's a transracial adoption. And that happened 3 years ago, and that's really what opened the doorway to me to become a person who became really focused on learning about race and learning about whiteness and learning about what I, as a white parent and as a white person, can be doing better and can be learning.
So that is a really interesting perspective. Yeah. I have a couple of good friends who have sort of transracial families, some through adoption and some through other avenues. So I think that maybe that provides a really good way into this question of, you know, what do people do in this moment where they're feeling maybe more called to engage around combating racism, understanding racism. You know, I can see, you know, sometimes I ask people like, what makes you sort of engage? But I think you just sort of laid out like this, you have this big motivator of it's a day-to-day part of your life.
Well, right. And not just like in two ways, and one of them is that I want to do everything I possibly can and be able to say to my grown son, or, my 80-year-old son when I'm 100 and whatever. Okay, that's kind of too far. Okay,
no, amazing.
I want to be able to say I did everything I could to make the world a better place for you and your children, and for people who face the same challenges that you did, or that people like you did. But I also want to make the world that he inhabits right now a safer place for him. And I think that what a lot of white adoptive parents go through, at least what we hope they go through, is if they haven't already seen, the two Americas, mostly talking about white adoptive parents in the United States, that if we haven't already really understood that the world is a different place for white people than it is for people of color, then we hope that when people become white adoptive parents, that they're willing to start looking at that and that they can really understand it as soon as possible, because there's a sort of understanding of it was in the transracial adoption world of when white people adopt kids of color, their kids are under their umbrella of white privilege for a certain amount of time and at certain times, but that they will always lose that because they go off on their own and they have to go to college, or they have to go to school where you're not there or something, and they're going to experience the world, and it's a huge shock if they don't know, if they aren't being given survival techniques by their parents from a very young age. And if they are coming home to someone and saying, this happened to me, and those white parents are saying, no, I think you misunderstood. Oh, that teacher's not racist. Or, oh, Auntie so-and-so, she's not racist. She didn't mean to say something that hurt you. So it's kind of really make the world better, but also becoming a good enough parent that my son feels like he has coping strategies to deal with the racism that exists for him.
So what I'm hearing from that is that you feel a responsibility as a parent and as a gifted person in the world, like the community of the world, and those are both really powerful motivators. I'm wondering if someone isn't in that place, isn't a parent, or is not in a sort of transracial family
member, or
yeah, if there's any part of the stuff you have done that you think connects, what have you been doing to kind of get into that space? Because there's the superficial, I understand, I'm treated differently, but there's then it seems like these layers of understanding that sort of never stop unfolding. So I wonder if there are things you can. Yeah.
I mean, I think the first thing, and I feel like you've talked about this before, and I feel like this is sort of step one for anyone who's white and sort of going through the process of unlearning what we've all been taught, which is everything's fine and race doesn't matter. But is sort of starting to really open ourselves up to listening and not talking, right? So I think that something that can be really helpful in this experience is to start looking at, okay, who am I listening to in general? Where does my world, whose worldview am I paying attention to? Like looking at the music we listen to, the movies we watch, the TV we watch, the newspaper articles that we're reading, the friends that we have on Facebook, who we are following on Twitter, every sort of source of media that we get, who is ultimately creating that. And if we look at it, most white people, most of us, a lot of that is coming from white sources. So we're listening to only white voices. And I think that a big step that somebody could take that's actually kind of easy is making room. So first of all, kind of, going through Twitter, going through the thing that doesn't matter to you as much, whatever that happens to be, and kind of turning off some of the white voices that are just repeating the things that you're hearing over and over again. So you can, you don't need to listen to every second of MSNBC. Just turn off some of it. And, pick just Rachel Maddow or just one, great left-wing pundit who's white. And then turn on some more people that might be more, that are people of color. So adding, I make sure that my Twitter feed, for instance, is always 75% people of color. And if I add a new white person, I add 3 more people of color so that I'm never sort of just overwhelming myself with white noise and white perspective. And I think that that's the beginning. It's starting to just, every time you watch a movie, or at least half the time when you watch a movie that has a director who's a person of color. Or every time that you watch TV, make sure, 1 out of 5 times or 1 out of 2 times, try to watch something that is for people of color, by people of color, and, you know, and different races, not just Black, not just Latino, not just Asian, and I think that that's a way to start seeing, like, because you'll see patterns. I mean, for me, this is what happened. I started saying, okay, I'll start listening to these. For me, it was adoptees who were adults who had been transracial adoptees and they had white parents. And I started listening to a few, and then I started listening to hundreds. And after a while, even though everyone is a little bit different and they're all saying slightly different things, you start to see patterns. And it starts to be really impossible to deny that there is a layer of structural racism that is, you know, devastating people's lives. And even though those people are okay, I'm not saying that they're, you know, this is not coming from a place of pity, but just coming from a place of understanding that this is woven in and out of it. It has no person of color was untouched by this. And, you know, I think that the way to get to that is to really spend a lot of time in a lot of different stories. And at least for me, that was really important because I saw these, because for me, it was the volume and the seeing of patterns and of realizing, like, it can't just be, you know, this isn't something that happens to some people, this happens to everybody. And it's going to happen to my child, it's going to happen to somebody that I know, it's going to happen to somebody that I care about. It has happened to people that I care about. And, yeah. That
is really, to me, what that sort of seems similar to is you're sort of describing a media and culture diet shift, like you're changing your intake, and that inevitably brings mindfulness. Like it just changes your awareness, even if you're not just like, you know, people often think of dieting as like all about losing weight, but like a healthy change to your diet is about just being more aware of what you're putting into your body. And this sounds like the exact same approach, which I like. I like how concrete that is. Have you found that challenging? Like, are there times when you backslide and you're like, oh, I just watched, you know, 6 episodes of whatever, or two or three movies. You know, is that are you tackling it with that level of? No, I wasn't attacking with any level of focus. Although I'm a sort of binger, so like I would binge on this. It was this Facebook group that really helped me understand a lot of this, and I would binge on these stories of adult adoptees, and then sort of, you know, like one story would lead to another, and I would search someone's name and read everything they'd written, or I would, you know, and then become friends with them on Facebook, and it was like I got really into it because because these are people and they're their stories, and it's very dramatic and very sort of, and you get invested and you build relationships with them, and then at least that's what happened for me, and that's why I think social media can be so powerful, is that these stories can be shared, you know, and if you're the kind of person who can do this, you can jump into somebody's life and sort of understand what they're putting out there, and you know, and there's a lot of it you can look through, and you can do it at your own pace. And so there's something that if you're a binger, there's a lot of material that you can go through. And I don't think that it's important to, like, I mean, for me, it wasn't important to say, like, okay, I'm never watching anything produced by white people again. You know, it's more like being comfortable watching something or reading something or even being in a space like or going to an event that is not for you, where you're an outsider, you know, and knowing, like, Empire is not made for a 40-year-old Midwestern white woman, a mom, and that's okay. And it's not like, and I'm not going to get everything, and I'm not going to think everything is great, or I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm not going to relate to everything, and I don't look at any character and go, oh, which one am I? But that doesn't mean that I can't enjoy it, and I also can't then read Twitter later and see what people are saying about it, and sort of like take part in that from an observer, and from a like I want to appreciate this part of culture that isn't for me. You know what I mean? Like it's like being a minority in something, I think, is really important for white people to do in a sort of pop culture sense. Does that make any sense at all? Yeah, I think you're articulating something important where it is rare for someone who looks like I do, who you know is especially like a white dude is sort of my frame. It's rare for me to go into a room or me to consume a thing that hasn't been sort of default tailored to me. Like I have to seek it out. I think that's what you're talking about is
right.
You have to make an extra step or two to connect with something. And it's
right.
good to know that that's true. For most people, that's true all the time. Like they have to make extra steps to connect and find something they can connect to. I think that's a thing you're articulating. That is.
Well, right. And I think it's also like, you know, now I have to like have a word of caution of like, that doesn't mean like going to a group of women going to a gay bar. It also isn't okay. You know what I mean? Like
right.
taking over the whole place or whatever. Like you don't want to be the white people who are like, hi, we're here to participate in your culture.
Yeah.
Like,
right. Tokenization
so
and tourism and all that. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like doing it in a way that's like, I don't even know how to articulate this, but it's like basically just trying to say, I'm trying to learn this perspective, but you don't want to have a presence in it. You know, like you're not like making someone else get out of the way so you can experience it. And I mean, I think that it's something that is, in a way, has to be kind of private so that you're not standing in the front row at the Chris Rock show. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Although, those are all white people. When I went to the Chris Rock show, they they were there, and he was fine with that. But so I think just the idea of of really seeking out new perspective and new stories for the purpose of broadening our own minds, and not just for entertainment and not just for whatever, but just really seriously saying, like, I want to key into perspectives that I haven't ever really tried to relate to and tried to listen to and understand. I guess advice I would have her, just something that definitely happens with this is finding a community that you think, okay, maybe this is going to be it, and it's not. Or finding friendships that you think, okay, this is, gosh, we can sit and we can talk about race and we can do all these things, and that isn't, you know, or this person can really help me see something, or we have really different perspectives, we really like each other. It just, there are a lot of false starts, I guess is what it is. And it sometimes takes a lot of, it's risk taking and putting yourself out there and knowing you might feel uncomfortable, and I guess with every other part of this unlearning whiteness is just being able to handle discomfort and not making that such a big obstacle that you can't get over it. I don't know.
I think that keep at it is really helpful.
Yeah. Right.
You have to be persistent.
Yeah. I mean, I would also say, like, there are a collection of articles that, and I know that it depends, like, sometimes it's, you know, stuff that just kind of floats around Facebook or other social media and things will resurface. Like there's an article about white fragility on the Good Men Project, and it's like it outlines all of these amazing like aspects of whiteness, like white racial innocence and, you know, things that I had never really thought of. And that's one of the articles that really grounds me, I would say, and that I've used that a lot in thinking about things and thinking, okay, how is this representing, or how is what I'm doing sort of falling back on my white fragility? And I would say, I mean, I don't know, like I feel like I have a collection of articles like that that I just really love. There's another one about white narcissism. I like that it's white privilege as white narcissism, and it's just about focusing on us and putting our feelings first. And another one about white tears that I really like. White tears, is it? White women's tears and the men who love them, I think is what that's called. And of course the Robin DiAngelo stuff, I don't know. And I remember, this is something sort of random, but one thing that was really helpful to me is I was starting this journey, you know, because of my son, and I was learning so much. And I was also a stay-at-home mom who'd gone from being a guidance counselor, an academic counselor at a high school where I'd had like 500 students, to being alone with my child. So I had a lot of intellectual energy that didn't have anywhere to go because he was a baby. There was nothing intellectual about that. So it happened to be a really good fit for me to learn. And I was learning all these amazing new things about race and racism and whatever. And then somebody posted a video called The Color of Fear. And it's a documentary. It's really a conversation with 5 men. And one of them is white, and he's a white man who like just doesn't believe that racism is real. And the other, there's like 6 people. There's one white guy and then 4 men of color, and they're all trying to talk to this one white guy. And what's significant about this is that it was something they showed me at my freshman orientation for college, and I thought it was just the biggest piece of bullshit I'd ever seen. I was like, whatever. And right, and that was 20 years, almost to the day that I saw it again, and it was like, oh, this is exactly what I've just been learning. This is everything. And I was like, oh my God, I could have learned this 20 years ago.
Yeah, those moments of regret are rough.
Right. Well, and of like realizing that what was so new to me was not new at all. And in fact was like, people had been repeating this, and the exhaustion that people of color and generations of people of color have felt with white people not getting it and like being like, oh my God, I just learned this new concept called white privilege or whatever. You know, it really helped me have some perspective about that. That every new idea I ever had was not going to be new. That every revelation was something that I think James Baldwin has already said, you know, in a book written 50 years ago. So I think that's really helpful too, is actually going back and watching, you know, videos of Muhammad Ali talking about race or watching I Am Your Negro or, you know, all of these things that are decades old and are still the same revolutionary concepts to white people who are just waking up. I think that perspective has also really helped.
That's great. Oh, I want to go look that video up, so thanks for that.
Yeah, it's really cool. A friend of mine sent me a link to this really great course. It's a webinar called Hard Conversations on Racism with a woman named Patty Dye. It's spelled D-I-G-H. But the person that she teaches the class with was this guy named Victor Lee Jones. No, that's not it. Victor something. But he is the guy from that video, The Color of Fear, that I was talking about. And we had these like call-in sessions, and he talked about like the conversation that he had with Peggy McIntosh when she first came up with the idea of white privilege, and how he said to her, like when she told him, I've discovered this thing called white privilege, he said his two thoughts that he had were, the first one was, oh, everybody knows that. Like everyone knows about white privilege. Like everyone knows that there are these white advantages that white people have. And then he thought, wait a minute, no, white people don't know that. And then he thought, oh, it must be that Peggy McIntosh is not white, because there's no other way that a white person would understand. Anyway, that class was a really, really helpful class as well.
What I'm also sort of, I'm assuming, but any of these moments could easily have been you going, oh my God, I feel so bad that I didn't pick up on this sooner, which can be a place of stoppage for people. So that is also important, is that you, I'm sure, had those moments, and I'm sure had some long naps, and, you know, all those like, this is overwhelming, and you kept wanting to grow and learn. I think that is another message I take from what you're saying, and that I know has been important for me, of don't waste too much time being mad at yourself.
Yeah, no.
Without deciding you don't have a responsibility. Like you can't opt out, but you'll also like paralysis becomes a way of opting out as well.
Oh, it sure does. Well, I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's also something where when you start participating in really hard conversations in a space, I mean, this is another thing that I think people, you know, white people need to do, is we need to be in challenging spaces. You know, I think there's a lot of conversation about like, don't be in a bubble. And, you know, part of the problem with our politics right now is that, you know, liberals are only speaking to liberals, and conservatives are only speaking to conservatives. And I think that there's something bigger here, where I think that there are a lot of people who kind of want to always be, and this is me. I mean, this is me for sure, and also I recognize it in other people. I always want, you know, you want to be the wokest or the most aware person in the room. And because that's a place of confidence, and white people are used to feeling confident because we're told everything we do is okay. So, you know, so once we feel kind of overwhelmed or like, oh God, I keep screwing up. I guess I don't know things. I thought I knew things. You know, that feeling of like drowning in your own ignorance. We kind of want to go back to the spaces where we're the ones who get it. And I think that that's something really important, that when we're doing this work, we're never letting ourselves stay in those rooms too long, you know, in those spaces, that we really have to always belong to some group, some space where we know someone's going to, and that could just be a friendship, that could just be, you know, somebody that you really trust who does this for you, who calls you on your mistakes and is able to say, you did this wrong and you said something wrong and you really messed up. And I think that that feels bad. I mean, it's the worst feeling. I mean, not the worst feeling, but it does feel bad. And it feels bad every time, and it doesn't stop feeling bad. Like, I've been doing this for, like you have, like a couple years, and of really actively trying to have these conversations and challenging myself, and I screw up all the time, like once a week or once a day, depending on how much I'm engaging, and it feels bad every time. But there's a euphoria that comes after that when you apologize well, and someone life moves on, you know. And I'm not saying like when someone accepts your apology, because I don't even think that matters.
No,
it's like when you go, I messed up, I'm listening now, and like, yeah. And you can even say, I messed up, I didn't see XYZ, I said something that was full of implicit bias. I'm sitting back and I'm still listening. And then you stay in the conversation. And this is so easy in Facebook because you could just keep liking what people are saying, and you're just still listening and showing your presence and watching people just tear apart what you said. And, you know, but the euphoria is that feeling of like, I owned it and I am never going to do that again. Yeah. And you know, you learned that lesson so hard that you're like, at least I'm never gonna make that mistake again. I'm not, you know, and that feels like real growth, and that confidence is gone forever. That like I can say whatever I want and have no consequences. That's gone. But there's this growth that I think is a much better feeling, even though it's a harder feeling. You know? Yeah.
Yeah, but that, I mean, it's like when you have sore muscles after you exercise. If you don't feel sore, you probably didn't actually do any work.
Right. Right, exactly.
So you have to come to love that, or at least get comfortable with that not feeling good. Like that, yeah. That becomes it's a weird thing you crave. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. I mean, of course, you don't want to, it always sucks to hurt somebody. You don't want to.
Yeah, no, that...
be like, that always feels bad, and it feels bad for them and whatever, but well,
this is awesome. I really appreciate you spending time and sort of sharing so openly about yourself, so thanks a lot for doing that.
Sure.
How to explain white supremacy to a white supremacist. Sometimes you are a lit match dropped into a boiling ocean. Sometimes you are a stray dog, proud of the sunrise after a long night of barking at the moon. Sometimes you scream at the television, shadow box mushroom clouds, your hand-to-hand hatred outclassed, outdated. You, post-apocalyptic litter bug. You, venomous spider in the basement of a burning building. You, whose anger is so vast and so empty. All teeth and no mouth, no jaw muscles, just that white rattle. Remember, white supremacy is not a shark. It's the water. It is how we talk about racism as white hoods and Confederate flags, knowing that you own those things and we don't. As if we didn't own this history too, this system. We tread water. And you, chum, in a bucket. How many skinheads do you think are in the room when they set immigration law? Or decide curriculum for public schools, or push policies like redlining, mandatory minimum sentencing, benign neglect, gentrification, broken windows, policing, voter ID, stop and frisk, 3 strikes, the drug war. Remember, the eye of the hurricane is the least destructive part. You, meanest glare in the chat room, all poker face and no cards. Was it your politically incorrect YouTube comment that made the median net worth of black families in this country 9% the median net worth of white families? Which individual Donald Trump bigot boogeyman are we supposed to be angry at about the millions of people impacted by discrimination in housing and banking and education and employment and the criminal justice system each year? Remember, sharks kill about 1 person each year. Thousands drowned. So, when there is a new name hashtagged each week, when police create more black stars than Hollywood, how long do we keep pointing out the bad apples, ignoring the fact that the orchard was planted on a mass grave? and that we planted it there. Because, of course, this isn't really a poem for white supremacists, right? Like, I don't know any white supremacists, but I know a lot of people in my neighborhood and in my family, and I know myself, and I know how white supremacy is upheld, whether through our action, our inaction, or just through paying our tuition and taxes, how it isn't just the broken treaty, it is also the treaty, how a gavel can speak as loudly as a grenade, how a white frat boy in blackface on Halloween and his friend who knows it's wrong but doesn't say anything begin to blur together, how the real racists today are very often not even racist. Those teeth sharper when smiling, sharper still when smiling and meaning it. A burning cross is so dramatic. Just say, I don't see race. Just say, we all have an equal chance if we just work hard. Just say, all lives matter. Just say nothing. Surround yourself with others who say nothing and convince yourself that silence is the only song, this muted underwater melody, this pulsing quiet. And when a chorus blooms in Baltimore, when trumpets sound in Ferguson, in Minneapolis, when every one of our cities breaks into song, will we hear it? Will we choose to listen? Or will we just continue treading water, watching for that great white shark, not realizing that we're drowning?
That last piece was How to Explain White Supremacy to a White Supremacist, performed by Guante with permission from Guante. Thanks for listening to this episode of Not About You. You can listen to all other episodes of Not About You. Go to napod.com. Thanks for listening to Not About You.